The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good day, everybody. This is Paul Sims from eyeforpharma, speaking to you from London. Well done for being on time. We're going to get started in just a second, but I'm going to wait one more minute as there's still a few people on their way into the room. So hold tight, don't go anywhere, and we'll be with you in 1 minute. Thank you. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for waiting there for a second, and welcome once again to today's webinar. Delighted you could join us. As I said, my name's Paul Sims. I'm chairman at eyeforpharma. I'm speaking to you from London today. And today's webinar is called the Core Multichannel Marketing Challenge, Understanding Customer Channel Preferences and Tailoring the Perfect Marketing Mix. And I'm sure you will agree with me that that title encompasses a number of areas that you will probably find pretty critical in your work at the moment. So in case it wasn't already obvious, I just thought I'd explain very quickly why we settled on this title. The first is, of course, because during our research, we found that a lot of prioritization is having to take place between multi-channel managers at the moment. The job has become very extensive and very all-encompassing, and it's hard to know exactly where and how to focus. So what we'll be doing today is trying to drill down on what really matters and how you can actually manage particularly your channel preferences and selection going forward. The second reason is because it's actually a very similar title to a Quintiles IMS white paper that was written very recently, and if you haven't read that yet, I strongly recommend you do so. It's a very interesting paper, and we'll pop you a link over by email after this webinar so that you can download that. And I have to say, Quintiles IMS have, you can see that their logos on the front of the webinar here, and that's because they've been a supporting partner to us in putting this together, and they've been absolutely fantastic in doing so, and they have not asked me to say this, but they've been real support not just on the content side, but also in making sure that we have a good audience today, and a good audience we do have. I believe that we have just hit 1,600 registrants for this webinar just before we went on air. So that shows that this is indeed an important topic and something that a lot of us are keen to address. Thankfully, we've got some experts in the room, as you can see from in front of you. Lots more intelligence from them, which is about to be displayed. So Sarah has joined us from Quintiles IMS. As you can see, she's the Vice President of European Thought Leadership, a very interesting job title, I think you'll agree. She describes it really as having a think tank remit and developing the perspective from Quintiles IMS to our industry going forward. And of course, Quintiles IMS these days is a significant outfit, 50,000 employees, and effectively one of the largest companies we have in the pharma space right now. So I believe that their opinion, their perspective, and indeed how they take us through from end to end is an absolutely critical thing that we need to listen to going forward. So delighted that they are here. Underneath Sarah's name, you'll see Panos. Panos is a well-known man in Europe as someone that is doing a great job at Novartis and actually has, as well as his pharma experience, a lot of different industry experience, telecoms, banking, for example, as well as being something of a digital expert. I hope he will agree with me in saying that. He has a computer engineering background as well, so brings a very useful angle to us today. So thank you for joining us, Panos. On your right-hand side, you'll see Anthony. Now, Anthony has been very kind to give up his time, as he's not actually from our industry. We thought it vital to bring in another perspective, and Anthony works for Old Mutual Wealth, where he's essentially responsible for all of the client-facing areas of the business, operational and development. And if you don't know Old Mutual Wealth, they are a company that specializes in savings and investments and retirement. So, of course, a financial services business that I would describe as being a little further ahead when it comes to customer experience than many of us in Pharma. And so we'll be delighted to hear from him. And last but certainly not least is Alice. Thank you for joining us, Alice, from the US. Alice is the Associate Director of Patient and Stakeholder Engagement, as well as being the Global Multichannel Strategy Lead. She has 16 years of experience really on the front lines with customer experience and was actually today described to me as the whiz kid of multichannel within her company. So I'm not sure if that's a phrase she uses, but it's certainly one that others do, and delighted that she could be with us today. So that's enough intro from me. We need to get going with our conversation. But before we do, I just want to say that this really is a conversation, and that means a conversation with you at home too. I'm going to be asking you guys to take part in a few poll questions throughout, but I'd love it if every one of you really was to ask at least one question using the Q&A box on the right-hand side of your screen. Of course, I will be taking notes as to who's being good and answering the questions. So please do contribute, and we'll be able to share some interesting perspectives. We'll be able to make this a real conversation. Of course, it's the only way to make sure you get your issues answered is to make sure you ask that question. So say hello to me now in the Q&A box, just so I know you're still listening, and we shall get on with today's session. The first thing we're actually going to do is, as I say, do a quick poll. So if you have a look at your screen now, you'll see something appear within it. So what is the biggest barrier to moving along the road to multi-channel maturity? We're going to be difficult on these questions and force you to choose just one. So it's basically a simple question this time, internal versus external. So vote now. Let us know where you personally feel that your barriers are. Of course, if you're working for a non-pharma company, then try and answer this from the perspective of your clients. But give us your answers now. I'm just going to hold that open for a few more seconds. We've got about 70% of votes in. 3, 2, 1. Okay, let's have a look. Right, very interesting results, as you will see popping up on your screen. Hayley, you need to just share that with everyone. There we go. 78%, so over 3/4 of you are basing that on internal. So it's our own fault, I think we've concluded here. I want to open up to our panelists now. So Sarah, to begin with, what are your thoughts? Is that what you expected? Is that what you wanted to see? And is it concurrent with the results that you found?
Well, actually, it's quite interesting, Paul, because it is. We haven't done as big a survey as we've just done now, but when we've spoken to our clients and partners on the question of what's really hindering a steady progress to multi-channel maturity, I've increasingly come to the view over the last couple of years that the biggest barriers are internal. They're in people's heads, they're in the company's cultures. It's those challenges which is an issue in one way, but also it quite clearly points to where you have to go in order to make the next step on multi-channel. It's about looking to your own organization. You can't say that there's immovable obstacles out there in the external environment.
I would agree with that, Sarah. So one thing I've noticed at UCB, I've been here for about a year, is that I think there's really just an amazing amount of groundswell and interest around multi-channel, and there's passion around making it happen, drive, but there's not across the company consistency or focus or I think some of the things that I see lacking in some various companies that I've worked in, and to some extent this one, a technology foundation that would support really multi-channel excellence on a global scale.
A slightly different perspective. Sorry.
Yeah.
A slightly different perspective of mine. Certainly, when I look back in history and where we've come from, certainly internal was a very big problem for us, and there was a bit of a fear around it. People felt that if we opened up different channels, how would that work within our operation? People were very comfortable with working in sort of fairly single channel or just one or two channels, and if we opened it up too far, that would create a lot of extra cost. They thought it would actually mean that we would that people might see their roles changing radically and so on and so forth. But as we've sort of progressed over the years, I think actually we're starting to see the pendulum swing a little bit more now, where I think culturally people are much happier with it. Our structures are being sort of more aligned, and so we know which channels we're now trying to support and which areas of our business are responsible for it. And in fact now it's much more about understanding what our customers are trying to achieve and what the regulatory framework, etc., brings about. So I think we're starting to see a shift away from internal and much more around the external.
So there is light at the end of the tunnel then, everybody. That's good to know. Ravi Kal from the audience, Ravi Kal says that the company stops thinking about investments in multi-channel as a cost. Only then will things get better, and I imagine that our panelists would agree. Panos, how about you?
Oh yeah, I agree.
Yeah, definitely agree. I think that also I agree with all the comments made already. I don't think that it's a technology issue as much, because we are having more and more sophisticated platforms and systems really popping up and trying to occupy that space that until so recently was still a bigger gap. I think that really it starts from having the internal miss out on how do we manage it, how do we work with multi-channel, how strong are we willing to be on changing our business model, because that's essentially what it is. It's changing the approach that you communicate with your customers. And frankly speaking, I don't think that everyone feels comfortable in that approach. So internal resistance, change management, but also really understanding where the opportunities lie is still a very big focus area.
Yeah, I can see that. I think the strategic advantage is still something that's, I guess, part of the conversation, at least at UCB. And one thing that I've noticed is the importance of analyzing the environment, the digital environment, to understand where HCPs and patients are naturally gravitating towards, and then plugging into those conversations is really the way to have that strategic advantage, as opposed to just creating a destination for them to go, which is typically their knee-jerk reaction, I think.
Well, Sarah, you'll have noticed that we've put a slide that you've created up on the screen here, which we thought might give people a bit more context. Do you want to take us through this quickly?
Absolutely, and I think it plugs into what we've already discussed as well. In the Quintiles IMS channel dynamics data, we're able to build a audit-based, very broad picture of where the big changes in pharmaceutical company promotional investment have been by region and over time. They are a wide range of channels that are tracked by the audit here, but we've grouped those wide group of channels into two types, what we've called traditional, and this means the traditional pharmaceutical company commercial model. It's led by the face-to-face rep interaction, but there's other channels that are everything to do with what happens in the real world. And then we've grouped 5 channels that we measure here that are digital. They're not the only digital things by any means. Things like social media and so forth aren't included here. This is about direct contact to a doctor by the pharma company via email, e-detailing, e-meetings, and so on and so forth. And you've got the 3 big regions. So these regions are 86% of the first 5-year sales of most protected new chemical entities. So they're where the promotion is going to be. Europe, Japan, US, and you've got solid lines for traditional time, and you've got dotted lines for digital contact time. And I think that the thing that we found here, which perhaps surprised us, was in these regions, the sort of the core of innovation-based companies' promotional spend. There's been quite different trends. Europe has lost 26% of all the face-to-face traditional time it had with doctors in terms of pharmaceutical company communication since 2011 in a 5-year period. In the case of Japan and Europe, that traditional contact time hasn't grown. It's declined slightly in some cases, but it's pretty much held up. The difference is on the digital time. Japan has grown the digital time that pharma can spend with doctors significantly in this time. It's now, a major component of the commercial model there. In the US, it has also grown, although not as much. The challenge is in Europe, digital contact time, according to our audits, is 0.7% of the traditional contact time we measure. So, we've already identified that it's actually more about the company where the key barriers are rather than the external environment. But in the external environment, we are at different starting points in the Quintiles IMS view with respect to multi-channel. It doesn't make the endpoint different, but we do have to understand where we are and the particular barriers that we're going to have to overcome to achieve the common end goal across the key regions. And I don't know, would other people on the panel, from their experience, agree with the way the data throws things out, or see a different picture?
So speaking for Europe, specifically with these panels, I think that this totally makes sense. What we're seeing is that overall we're really having physicians and customers overall not accepting reps more and more. They do want to switch into other ways of being communicated, and as such our overall communicational time is indeed dropping. And I do have to agree with the sluggish uptake on the new channels. So I'm really hoping that this is something that will change in the future, but still I think that this chart totally makes sense. I'd love to know what Japan is doing more, as this is really impressive.
Yeah, the thing that we saw in Japan was there's very high digital frequency and digital volume share, but it's not necessarily about quality. I mean, if we go to the next observation, we have the next slide where we just threw in some qualitative feel to this. So there's just a couple of builds, one more build on this after you've got that, and then we go to the next one. So that if we move to the next one now.
Sorry, Sarah, just trying to move it for you.
Oh, okay. I'm flying by wire here. I suppose you have to think not only about, the channel activity, is digital a big share of all channel volume? It is in Japan. It's now a significant percentage, and it is in the US. And this is purely a qualitative view, I don't think that digital content sophistication is necessarily high in Japan anyway. It's probably higher in the US. And in Europe, I'd argue that whilst there's differences between countries, and indeed surprisingly Poland, by our audit, has the highest digital volume share, it's still mostly behind where the US and Japan is. I don't know, Alice, with your US experience and your global experience, whether you'd agree with that picture from what you've seen.
I definitely would agree with it, and I think that the key is, as I kind of said earlier, the key to having uptake in the digital channel is understanding where people are spending their time online, whether it's subreddits or whether it's mommy blogs, if you're a patient, just understanding where medical forums, those sorts of things, and then plugging into the conversation, knowing what they're talking about in your particular segment that has market opportunity or strategic advantage, and then bringing that to the table will make them want to talk more, either via email or in person. But just making sure that there's a high-quality conversation, then you're bringing it to the table. It's not necessarily about a particular brand or drug.
I would just reinforce that, certainly in our sector, it's not just about being everywhere, it is about being relevant, and if you actually have the right information in the right places, then people will come to you and find it. If you actually try to be everything to everybody, you end up just being saturating and effectively turning people off, is what we've been finding.
Just to say, our audience are asking for a little bit of clarification. We've got a few comments in around how you measure the contact times, and also, Sarah, if you could explain if you went into any granularity around type of physician, for example, age, demographic, that kind of thing, as to I mean, I think we all probably know that digital is more comfortable for the younger generations, but did you look at that at all and have anything to share there?
Okay. Well, at the risk of this becoming a channel dynamics features discussion, which I don't want to. And by the way, we'd be happy to answer these questions in depth at another point, and there's information on the Quintiles IMS website. Very briefly, these insights are based on a diary-based panel of a broad set of healthcare professionals. So we have lots of panels of specialists in the country, as well as general practitioners, but also some other panels like pharmacists and nurses, where they're asked to fill in a diary of all the contacts that they have from the pharmaceutical industry, who contacted them about what the length of time was, what the key messages were, and what the impact they felt that contact had with respect to the brand. So the time is recorded, point one. Second, on the types of doctor, we're absolutely recording the specialties. We don't necessarily record demographics. I suddenly take the question that was asked point, that we would expect to see different use by different demographics. But we thought about this in our work, and we took two working assumptions. Firstly, just as populations become more digitally enabled, doctors are probably at the leading edge of that rather than the lagging edge of that. It may or may not be the right assumption. Secondly, the digital generation, the internet generation are now in the mainstream as far as being doctors and clinical practice is concerned. So we didn't think, if the question behind the question was this, that demographics explain the big differences we're seeing in this very broad view between the regions.
Thank you, Sarah. I really appreciate that. We've got a lot of more audience questions, but actually I think that they're going to fall in with exactly what we've got with our next section of today's webinar. We're going to show you another poll now. So if you look at your screen yet again, you'll see this one. Do you feel that your adoption of digital communication so far has enhanced or reduced your customer insight? So is it actually working? Is it actually something that you feel you're getting something out of? So again, this should be a relatively simple question for you to answer, so I'll just hold it open for a few seconds. Strongly enhanced, enhance a little, neutral, not sure, reduced a little, or strongly reduced. 3 more seconds, I think. So 3, 2, 1. Let's have a look at the results. Okay. Strongly enhanced, 21%. So but I would say that enhanced and little and neutral are the winners of today's competition, together forming about 3/4 of the answers, and actually very low on the reduced to little and strongly reduced amounts. So there's no negativity here. There's nothing stopping us. Basically, so far I've learnt that internal is holding us back, yet there's no downside. So why aren't we doing it more? Where are we trying to get to? What are the actual issues? So I'm going to come to Alice and Panos, I think, here as the people on the ground doing it. So what is actually the reason we can't do this more, and how are we able to gain better ROI from it in general, would you say, Alice?
I would say, it's about understanding the channel specifically, where your segment is focused, and then making sure that you understand that channel deeply, and how the frequency with which they want to interact, the tone, and understanding just the communication style of that particular segment to make sure that you're gaining the right type of insight. So it's about targeted conversations within a particular segment to make sure you're extrapolating the proper insight.
Alice, you'd
I
be
don't
an
know if
advocate
that helped or
of
not.
well, Alice, you'd be an advocate of early choice of channel and focus on those select channels, presumably, rather than a more iterative development, trying everything and moving forward from there.
Yes, I would agree with that, and I would say prioritizing based on segment preference, market opportunity, and strategic advantage.
Okay, 3 things I hope everyone's written down. Panos.
Yeah, well, I fully agree with that. I think that overall, it does make sense that, you know, digital really helps in terms of understanding better customer insights. There are tons of stuff you can actually measure and different KPIs you can actually set. I think that the real question here is on whether it's the keyword insight and customer insight on how better are we getting at it. And while I do believe that, yes, we're getting a breadth of more data, I'm not entirely sure that we know exactly what to do with it yet. So I completely agree with the fact that more and more data supports this. I think that the key here is, building on what Alice just said, is how do we connect this data back to business outcomes? How can we measure the right KPIs that are driven by our business, by brands, by customer experience and so on, and how do we connect it back to the digital KPIs as they are resulting out of the communications we're doing with new means. So that's one outtake that I would definitely keep. Yeah, go ahead.
And that sort of is where the technology piece becomes really important, and having the underpinnings of a really great CRM and CMS and preferences management system in place, so that when you have really great insights, you can apply them back through technology to target your communications and deepen the conversation, because you have good tracking mechanisms to, you know, identify what's working, what's not working, what was the last conversation I had with this person, what you know, and have that digitally centralized so that everybody has access to that information that should have it.
Yeah, I would really support that. I think there's a tendency to think about the initial interaction and then not think so much about how you're going to support that going forward. And a big part of this is about, for me, is all about keeping on going back, keep gathering the insights, keep looking at what people are doing, why they're doing it, tracking usage and so on and so forth. No, it's really important. This isn't a one-off thing. You have to, once you start, you just have to keep monitoring and investing and adapting your style, adapting what you're doing, so that to maximize the opportunity.
Well, the audience certainly agrees. People are, for example, Michael Madden says that highlighting contact time, content sophistication is all very well, but uncovering insights around which you can intervene with each of your HCPs or patients to impact marketing performance is absolutely key. I've got lots of comments of that nature. How do you take your KPIs and turn them into a next best action for your targets? That's from Timothy Graham. And I think that it's the translation of effort. Ravi Kal, who spoke before, said we need to be actually better at crunching the digital KPIs in the first place, because too much data is making us lose the plot, as he puts it very mildly. So, Sarah, any advice here for translating insights to action?
All of the points I think that some people have raised are extremely relevant, and I suppose it speaks to the fact that you can't have the same skills and the same traditional approach to, for example, building your marketing plans and your product strategies when you have this powerful new set of channels and these powerful new sources of information about your customer interactions. You know, marketing plans traditionally were relatively static. They happened at a certain point in the year. Things were pretty regimented. Now you've got to be able to respond to feedback and information as it comes in, and be prepared to adjust and change quite rapidly. And for an industry that has been, in the past quite hierarchical, quite forward planned and relatively rigid in the execution of that. These are big and sometimes, I think, uncomfortable changes for organizations. And the nature of the data that is coming in as well, sometimes via these interactions, and more broadly, of course, via the social media data that could come from patients and so on and so forth, is often less structured. It's more ambiguous sometimes than the data that perhaps we used to rely on when we were building plans and making decisions. So our mindset about the way that we use this information has to change, as well as the information itself.
Okay. Now, nobody's actually mentioned something which I'm surprised about so far, which is the sales force. And of course, they are one way in which we can certainly get FaceTime, if not implementation, with our individual customers. And I want to ask another poll question at this stage. I think there's going to be a consensus around the need for Salesforce to be a part and considered an equal partner. But how important is it that the sales force are actually engaged with the journey to multi-channel maturity is the question you'll see in front of you. Do they need to be involved in the planning? Do they need to be enthused about it? And do they need to be central in the feedback mechanisms? So let's just hold that open for a few more seconds. I'll hold open for 3, 2, 1. Thank you very much, everyone who voted. Okay, so I don't think I'm hugely surprised by the results. Again, 3/4 are saying absolutely crucial. Some of us saying of some importance, and 4% saying nice to have but not crucial. If you're part of that 4%, and obviously a few of you are, would you mind just writing in and expanding upon your results? Why don't you feel that the Salesforce are crucial to being part of this journey? As obviously your opinions go against the grain a little there, and I'd be interested to hear from you. But any comments from our panel on that? Is that noteworthy in any way?
I'm so glad that it came out this way. Sorry, go on.
Yeah. I was just going to say, that certainly within our industry, we found this was absolutely vital. That we really needed our sales force to be behind us. I mean, I described it as evangelists, not terrorists. And we needed them to be really advocating everything we were trying to do, and we needed them to be able to talk about our proposition and to be enthusiastic about it, and not see it as something that to be fearful of, but actually see it as something they really needed to embrace and help people use. So I really would advocate that as being the right approach.
I agree, and I think, if I look at it from a user experience perspective, the Salesforce, they are internal customers, if you will, of a multi-channel program. It's important that they are bought in, that they understand their role, that they feel their role is important, and that they help shape all of the communication, whether it be online, offline, and that they are plugged into that conversation, because they are the front line. They are the touch point that makes it happen. Even if their interaction is less, not in person, digital, those sorts of things, they are the ones that hold the conversation.
I agree.
Okay.
Well, I think that one thing that we found when we were talking about the findings from our analysis of the audit data was that people said that ultimately multi-channel management should be a Salesforce enhancement approach. It helps the sales rep themselves to be more effective at what they do if they are fully plugged into and engaged with it and making use of the tools that you can make available to them. Almost the worst question that an executive can ask about multi-channel at the start of the process is what is the ROI on digital versus the ROI on my sales team, because that's instantly saying. You would agree?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah. Because it's immediately suggesting it's either or. That ultimately your plan is to be able to replace one with the other. And it's not about that. But unfortunately, that's the kind of question that gets asked all too often in my experience.
Well, the audience,
and it basically puts the entire
sorry,
organization on the defensive, you know, and it basically creates a tremendous friction and does not accomplish the goal of patient experience, good patient experience, or improved business performance.
Well, I've had 5 audience questions in quick succession, all of which are agreeing with the points, but also explaining that whilst we might say that in theory, it's the management of the sales force that is often the barrier, and that really getting the infused sales managers on board, there's a fear of the sort of big brother nature of a lot of the management, particularly when marketing are looking in as well. For example, there's a lot of management of keeping the sales force up to date. They're often, even if they might be consulted up front, there's a lot of legacy issues that they then have. Can we get some online learning? Can we find some better ways to do that? Is something that a lot of people are saying. So, and then of course, you know, the new skills requirements as well. So, have we got any advice? Maybe we'll go back to you, Panos, as someone who is probably trying to issue these kind of instructions horizontally across your organization. How do you actually engage your sales force and make sure that they feel enfranchised throughout this process?
Yeah, excellent question, Paul. So I think that through the experience, something that does seem to work is making sure that the field force are the people who actually lead this through. Usually filtering out within the franchises the sales reps in the field that have a bigger passion for multi-channel and an eagerness to see how they could make this work, usually by making them change agents and making sure that they get it right, but also very closely see what's working, what isn't, and heavily communicate within their teams, but also their area of influence. Overall, this really seems to move the needle much more than just plainly and horizontally communicating and just sending emails through. These seem to just fall out the overall area of interest for the reps. But if they start seeing that this is happening for one of them and they do show much more passion, this really drives this forward.
You mentioned the word passion there, and I wonder if I could also add another word, which would be vision. Panos, do you feel that, for example, within Novartis, your company, that people like yourself are adept at explaining exactly what multi-channel maturity, what the destination, what the ultimate actually looks like, and inspiring people a little to actually hit that goal? I'd like you to answer that, and I'd also be interested in Anthony's opinion on that too.
Exactly. Thanks for asking that. I mean, that's more than 50% of what I'm doing daily is making sure that I'm articulating that vision in a way that really gets through into country teams, into brand leads, franchise heads, country affiliate heads, and so on. So that they really get a chance to shape that vision together, but they also really understand on how that will impact their business. So I think that one of the major roles that multi-channel leads or digital leads or what have you have in a company the size of Novartis or other companies as well is essentially preaching. Preaching multi-channel, seeing how the vision would change and making sure that that gets through.
Yeah, I would support that. I mean, our approach was very much that we engaged with the sales team very heavily up front. We have sales representatives on any project within this area. We had them very heavily involved, and we do have them very heavily involved in our strategy workshops. And for the salespeople themselves, we did 2 things. One, we created an accreditation scheme where we actually put a lot of effort into training them and sort of testing them, but not testing them in a bad way, but sort of offering prizes and little treats for getting above the bar. Because what we found was we really need them not to be fearful, but we needed them to be, as I said earlier, very strong advocates. And we needed to, for them to feel they could do that, we wanted them to feel that they were really strong in the subject matter. So we created an accreditation scheme, and then we back that up now with some technical support desks for our own salespeople and people they can call upon to go out with them if we have new things coming along. So it was really about wrapping our arms around them and making them feel they're a massive part of the whole journey and the whole future strategy for us.
Anthony, this is Alice. I have a question. For you about how do you incent. What's your incentive structure, I guess? Because part of reducing fear within a sales force, I would imagine, would be making sure that the incentive structure is in place to support a move towards multi-channel. Did you guys restructure how you incent your sales force, your sales managers, those sorts of things to reinforce the need for embracing multi-channel?
To a degree, but actually, but not probably quite as obviously as that. We obviously incentivize people, our sales team, on the amount of business that's coming through. We see multi-channel as just being part of our core business, rather than something that needs to be incentivized separately. So we don't actually have a particular KPI for salespeople around it, but it is just part of the overall package that they're rewarded on.
Okay.
And Anthony, just staying with you for one more second, I want to ask you a more open question. I mean, you've heard now a little bit about how pharma companies are conducting their business. You've been at our conference. In a more open fashion, what would you say from your experience is something that we're not currently seeing in terms of multi-channel management and channel preference, channel selection in pharma that you perhaps are perplexed as to why we're not doing more of in our industry, or perhaps you've come up with some ideas within your space that are unique to your company that you could share. So where do you sort of feel that from a completely open point of view that we could make some gains?
Okay, well, a completely open point of view. I mean, we spend a lot of time listening, going out and asking questions, listening to what people want. We then invest a lot of time in measuring and monitoring usage, looking to see how people are using it, is it usable, and then actually committing to continuous investment within, just to make sure that we're using the channels appropriately. What we found initially was we were a bit inclined to scattergun all over the place. We felt obliged to try everything, and over the period of time now, we've really sort of honed that in. We often get accused, well, have often been accused in the past, particularly, of actually trying to put too much through each channel. So too many emails, and then, for example, and then therefore you end up with important things being lost in the mix of not so important. So we've spent a lot of time just homing that down. So I think listening, understanding your audience, understanding what it is they're looking for, keep going back, keep asking, keep checking in. We've did a lot of that in the early days, and I think that sort of helped us to reach where we are now with very good adoption rates, very good usage, very good feedback.
Thank you. We're fast running out of time, but I'm getting a lot of audience questions, and if the panel could just write these things down, maybe they can refer to them in their later answers. A lot of questions around the use of medical science liaisons and with key account managers that haven't really, we've not really had any examples of how they can be incorporated within. We actually ran a webinar for the medical teams last week that was equally popular as this one, and they certainly have great ambitions and designs on our customer engagement in the future. So how are we going to work with them? And then customer types is another theme that's coming into a lot of questions. We've been talking mainly about targeting of physicians, but what about payers? And is that within our responsibilities and remits of the multi-channel manager now, and how do we need to change accordingly? So there's a few questions there, but I'm going to go straight on to the next poll question as we don't have a huge amount of time left. And actually, Sarah, I don't suppose you could do me a favor and just quickly explain what you mean by business transaction volume here, as it's not 100% clear to me as this question came from you.
I think that was my question, actually.
Sorry?
I don't think that this was my question.
Exactly. So what? Oh, or was it Panos' question, perhaps?
Yeah, that would be my question. So
Okay.
just to quickly go through it, essentially by the level of customer interactions that would actually be done through multi-channel.
Right, okay. So you can see there the bands are 0 to 20, 21 to 40, 41 to 60, 61 to 80, 81 to 100. If I can hold that open for a few more seconds. I've got about a third of you voting so far, so I'll give you 5 more seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's have a look at the results. Okay. It's fairly even. Well, I said it's fairly even for the first three. It's fairly first four. It's fairly even, but then drop off at the top of the range at only 4% there. So is that what you would have expected, Panos?
Well, to be honest, I'm a bit surprised that we got some in the higher end of more than 60% in 5 years' time. So I think that's a pretty aggressive model. I tend to be more into the 40 to 60% range. But I'm really hoping that this shows the eagerness that we're having today. So,
well, we have an ambitious audience. What can I say?
Yeah.
Sarah, you didn't get a chance to answer the last question. So, any comments on what you saw before or on this?
So, as Panos says, I think that it's quite an ambitious target, but I think that ambitious is where we should be when we're talking about multi-channel, because there was a great deal of change in the share of customer interaction when we're talking about doctors largely that is digital in the last 5 years. You know, the US was reasonably similar in terms of the share of interaction that was digital as the European countries in 2011, and now it's moved very rapidly and clearly ahead. So change, substantial change, is possible because it has happened, and we should expect that there could be substantial changes in the next 5 years. The challenge is going to be maintaining the quality and the relevance of the interaction as the channels change. Multi-channel is clearly not just about digital, but let's take digital as an example. Can you grow the share of interactions that are digital while continuing to make digital a relevant and good quality source of interaction between yourselves and the doctors? And some of the work we've done in the most recent study, which we may have time to come to, suggests that in some countries the success of digital is also bringing its own challenges as doctors perhaps become so habituated that they start to turn off a little.
Interesting. And Sarah, while we're with you, do you have any comments as to the earlier audience comments I mentioned about payers and about using our medical and key account management colleagues?
So on the MSLs and CAMs point, I think that as increasingly what the pharmaceutical industry is bringing as new innovation is often highly sophisticated specialty products, unsurprisingly, your commercial team is a team of a number of different types of functions and individuals that have to be coordinated together effectively. So many products these days are oncologicals, they're biologics, they're autoimmune agents, they're often agents for very rare diseases. To introduce these successfully, you do need a combination of MSLs, reps, CAMs, and indeed other types of individual as well. And unsurprisingly, the payer is a key group locally and nationally, and in some cases, because we're getting international price negotiations internationally, because these are high-cost products and they have big budget impacts sometimes.
Okay, and Sarah, you alluded to some work you've done on this, so we've shown another slide. Do you want to have a quick look at that as well?
Yes, actually, could we move back to the one that was just before this, I think? Brilliant, thanks a lot. So this is something which we won't have time to go into detail now, and I want to make sure that the rest of the panel has time to put forward their points. But very briefly, when I was referring to the point about digital sometimes being so successful that it becomes a bit ordinary for the doctors, here is the results of a survey we did on what doctors said they wanted as far as the channels that pharma communicates to them by their first preference versus what, according to Channel Dynamics audit data they got. In Japan and the US, doctors get more digital in terms of share of communication than they are asking for as far as share of first preference. And those are the countries that have the most digital activity. So, you know, have we overshot here? Do we have to not dial down digital, but make sure that digital is still relevant? Maybe I'll open that up to the rest of the panel.
Yeah, please, if anyone has any comments. You silenced them.
Yeah, so Paul, this is Panos. Just looking at the countries within Europe, so UK, France, Spain, Germany, and Italy, I think that this does make sense. UK seems to be taking the lead in terms of digital interactions, followed by Germany and France, which I would roughly have to say that these numbers do make sense, but still we do have a lot of room to cover, ground to cover, specifically for Spain and Italy, because these are markets that are still very much face-to-face driven. And I would have to say that more in Central Europe and primarily in the Northern Europe countries, we see digital having a bigger say into the way that companies are interacting with physicians. Still, it's a very big gap that we're seeing in Southern Europe. At least that's my first comments. I think that this does make sense. Again, impressed by the level of interaction in Japan.
Well, and I guess having watched, you know, one of the things that I bring to the table are I'm from the Midwest in the U.S., so relatively slow part of the country, and then now I live in Atlanta. I've lived in Paris, and UCB is global. So I lived in Paris in '96, and at that point, Mitterrand hadn't logged on to the internet. It was still Minitel. And I was just out of college, and you know, we all had email accounts and we're on the internet all the time. In Kansas, in the U.S. So my point is, I think that it's important to keep track of the trajectory over time of how technology will influence the market in various countries.
Okay,
Completely agree. I mean,
yeah.
You know, the thing about this, to Panos' point, is yes, Italy and Spain, the southern European countries, are very much rep and relationship driven right now, and that is fine. But what this is saying is that the doctors actually, while still valuing rep relationships, are asking for more digital. So there's an opportunity there to meet a key audience ask. You know, what doctors want isn't always exactly what you should be providing to them in terms of the way that you communicate them. But anybody who is buying something, whether it's yourself buying groceries or a doctor who is making a decision about a therapy for a patient, if they're communicated with on a channel that they want to be communicated with on them, you've already opened the door to more receptiveness as far as hearing your message is concerned. So the doctors, to me, in Spain and Italy and Germany are saying we're more receptive to digital than you think we are.
Well, let's see what the audience thinks, shall we? Shall we do a final poll question? We've only got a couple of minutes left, but let's just have a very quick final one. And whilst you're answering this, I'll just read out a couple of more audience questions. By the way, we will be circulating slides afterwards. Lots of people are very interested in your slides, Sarah, so yes, we will let you have those, but also there's the paper that you can download. Don't forget about that. But a lot of people saying, well, in answer to the last poll question, you've got a lot of sales reps which should be included in the multi-channel mix, so that's why they chose 80 to 100% as their responses there, Panos. We've got a lot of surprise around the no digital activity in places like Spain and Italy, and a lot of people very intrigued by that. We've got a lot of people looking at trying to sort of reconcile some of the previous things that we showed with digital contact time and the latest slides, so lots of people wanting more information there. I can see that already 40% of you have voted on the question in front of you, so let's focus our attention on that. What is stopping you giving doctors the digital communication they're asking for? And obviously we were just alluding to this in the last conversation. At the moment, quite similar results between them all. Shall we close the vote? Yes, let's close the vote. Thank you very much, everybody. So most of you voted there. And as you can see, it's a pretty evens thing, really about a quarter for every result here. And it doesn't seem that there's one thing that's holding us back. It's everything, if I can summarize it in that way. Let's go back to Alice. So, you know, I described you at the beginning as a multi-channel whiz kid. How are you managing to get results and actually provide what people are asking for? We obviously saw in the US the digital uptake is stronger, so you perhaps have a cultural openness to it, but still, what's the best advice you could give us lowly Europeans?
Oh my gosh, that's ridiculous. Nice British self-deprecating humor there.
Indeed, indeed.
All right, so I guess I would agree with the 29% of the lack of joined-up planning between departments if I had to cast a vote. And so part of my effort here at UCB is to get the various departments to agree on how we want to address multi-channel communication. So that includes getting marketing and technology and sales to work with each other. So sometimes the marketing department won't include the sales reps in their brand plans, you know, and then the technology group won't necessarily include marketing and, you know, requirements for important systems that would impact the way we market. So, you know, just building understanding about the dependencies among the departments and getting people to break down their insecurities and barriers so that we can succeed as a business.
Okay, would others agree with that, Panos? Anthony?
Well, I would agree with that. I think that it's a mix of everything. Even if you do get the senior level buy-in, then probably down the line you don't get everyone really agreeing or seeing eye to eye on what the approach would be. And that's plainly simple because there's no real silver bullet in the way that one would go about doing it. I would personally vote for lag in change management, but equally skills and capabilities are still a big gap in companies today.
Yeah, just coming there very quickly. It was interesting when the choice came up. I thought I actually wanted to go for all four of them, with looking at things from different lenses. If I had to settle on one, I would also go for skills and capabilities. I think that is there's still a shortage of that, and people understanding exactly what it is trying to achieve and how best to achieve it. Equally, though, I do think different departments need to work very closely together. Picking up on my point earlier about actually not bringing things together as one, seeing this as one sort of entity rather than lots of disparate different things, and the way to achieve that is by talking and joining up. But I would have actually quite liked to have gone for all four, which is quite interesting.
And Sarah, can you give us just a 20-second final sum up of where you feel that we need to go next?
Okay, don't know that I can do it in 20 seconds, but I will try. I think that we have come a long way in the last 5 years as far as an industry is concerned in embracing multi-channel, but we are not at the stage of multi-channel maturity yet. And indeed, in some ways, we may never be, because as we get there, the end game will change. It will become broader. We'll be talking about more types of customers, more types of functions within the commercial model, more types of interaction as our ability to orchestrate customer engagement grows. Nevertheless, we've got to be realistic and recognize where we are at in the major markets. I've been really heartened by this discussion, because it's shown us that a lot of the challenges that companies have are internal, and that means they're challenges that companies can control and do things about to change. The other positive thing, really positive thing I would take out is that because we're not in the stage of multi-channel maturity, no company is playing catch-up here. Every company has the opportunity to move forward to ride the wave of change. And this will very much be the future. The genie is out of the lamp. It's not going back. As doctors change where they get their information from, where they want to communicate, pharma is really starting to get to grips with following them.
Thank you, Sarah. And I'm afraid we're out of time. I'm just going to share two final audience comments which amused me. Rude Clark has been commenting throughout and says, it's time to forget about all of the old school arguments. Look around you, the world is changing much faster than pharma can handle, and we need to be a real partner again and create trust first, and it's about the messages that we give within our multi-channel rather than the channel. So that was an interesting comment. And Barbara, who's also been quite talkative, Barbara Jasewski, says that she thinks that perhaps Donald Trump's tweets are going to be the fastest movement in digital behavior change that we will influence us going forward. So, we are experiencing a new era, that's for sure. I want to say a huge thank you to our panel for joining us today. Anthony, Panos, and Alice for giving us the time. Sarah for giving us her time and her guidance and expertise in making sure that today's webinar happened very well, I think. So thank you very much. Do send us a little final thank you or a final question as you leave. We'll make sure that we get to those questions that we haven't been able to answer. And I do want to draw your attention, of course, as you will have no doubt seen in the bottom right corner of your screen, we do have places where this conversation will continue, and I'm pleased to say most of the people on your screen will be at least one of those events. So do make sure that you are there too. Barcelona on March 14 to 16 and Philadelphia on April to 2021. Both of these events are actually so far at least 30% ahead on previous years in terms of the number of registrations. So they're going to be very popular and very useful from a networking point of view. Really the only places to be if you're in this game later in the year. So have the conversation continued there. As I said, we will be sending the slides and a recording as well, and do let us know what we haven't covered, any other questions as you leave. Thank you again, panel. It's been a stimulating conversation, and I look forward to seeing you all at one of those two events very soon. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.